before we get started, I just want to let you know, Tasty Mail, a fantastic company that sends candies and chocolates to you in the mail, are running a competition, and you can win a £13.99 box of goodies, and they will be delivered to you for free from Tasty Mail. All you have to do is like this video, you have to comment that you've liked this video, and you have to hop over to Tasty Mail's Instagram account and like and follow them. Once you've done that, you'll be in the running to win this box. The winner will be announced in the next episode, so good luck everyone. Hi and welcome to another episode of PDA Dad UK. In this episode I want to look at EHCPs, Educational Healthcare Plans. It's a question that comes up a lot on the group I run on Facebook for parents of autistic kids, and it's something that I was putting feelers out on Twitter and just asking what people were after, so what information they'd like me to cover on future episodes. And one of the ones that came back quite a lot was that EHCPs were an area of confusion, so that's what I've chosen to focus on this week. EHCPs, as I say, they're Educational Healthcare Plan. Basically, they're a legally binding document that is agreed between schools, parents and any involved authorities or support agencies to ensure that kids are getting the best chance at a good education they can get, is essentially what it is. So I'm going to give you a bit of my story and how we came to get an EHCP, because I've got to be honest, when we started out, I had no idea what one was. And we were in mainstream school, my daughter was in mainstream, and we'd had an unusual situation in that she had completed reception, but she was only in class for 50% of the time. We had a very, very good school, I think, in the sense that they really understood that she had some extra needs. They could see it very clearly, and they put a lot of things in place off their own bat to ensure that she was being looked after and that everyone else was being kept safe as well. So she had a one-to-one which was with her constantly throughout. It was very clearly needed, but she was out of the class 70% of the time. So basically issues were occurring, there were stuff going on, she'd be too anxious, she wasn't able to focus, she'd either lash out or she'd run away or do anything, and so she wasn't in class. They kept taking up, they built a sensory area for her outside the classroom, which was lovely, and she could go in there to sort of calm down. And they were doing everything they could within their sphere of ability at that point, but they ended up repeating her on reception because she'd spent so little time in the classroom. It was clear she wasn't going to be able to cope with year one. They repeated her for reception, but when it came to the end of the second reception year, it was clear that mainstream just wasn't working for her. It wasn't an environment that was going to work for her, and we needed to do something. And they were saying, we really think you need to look at some of the local special educational needs schools around. To do that, you're going to need to have an EHCP. And I was, oh yeah, okay, whatever, what's an EHCP? And I didn't realise at the time just how lucky we were that we had a school that was this supportive and this understanding. I had an education that very quickly afterwards, which I'll come on to explain. Basically, the EHCP was initiated. So at that point we had a social worker involved. So Sienna's behaviours were a concern obviously within the school, and we'd had that included with us. That was really helpful. We had a really good worker with us at the time who came in, sat down with us during the EHCP initial meeting. We had the 0 to 25s team. Now they are, in our area anyway, they're the group that look after any placements for kids in schooling. So it's their job to ensure that every child, regardless of needs, is in education, whether that be mainstream, whether it be special education needs schooling, whether it be homeschooling. They are there to ensure that it's taking place and that everyone's confident with that. They basically do the review, so they do the whole EHCP process. And we sat down and we hashed out, and basically it was dissecting behaviours. They actually had spoken to Sienna separately on her own, and that was really good. They just wanted, what do you want from school? One of those things that for a 5-year-old was, yeah. But obviously if you've got older kids moving into high school and stuff like that, and this is needed, that becomes really relevant, because what do you want to do with your life? If you want to be a chef, then how can we make that a reality for you? But basically what we did was break down behaviours and the challenges and the difficulties that we're facing, looked at the positives as well. Obviously the focus of anything like this is to look at the challenges and to address the challenges. Let's be realistic. And so we did that. And so the EHCP was formed by looking at basically a big brainstorming session at the beginning of the meeting. So we were just, I'm concerned about this, I've seen this, we're worried about this, the aggression, lashing out, running around, not focusing. She's behind in maths, she's behind in her language, speech and language development, blah, blah. And it's all listed, and then that was kind of condensed into bullet points that we could then address. So that actually forms the basis of the EHCP. So aggressive behaviours was obviously a concern. We brought that up, that was put up there. What can we do about that when it's happening at school? Okay, well, so basically you have a column which is the issue, there's a column which is kind of an objective, so what can we do when these situations themselves, and then the last column was goals, which was basically looking at how we want to be able to see this progressing within 12 months. And so for aggressive behaviours, it was obviously if we're seeing anxiety or aggression, then removed from the classroom, she has a sensory area, she can be placed in there until she's calm enough to return to the main body of the class. Goals, we'd like to see this reduced frequency within the school year, and hopefully we can help move Sienna May out of these behaviours so that she's progressing more into her schooling. And it broke all those things down. At the end of the meeting, everyone sort of comes to a point where they, yep, we agree with this, that's great, and it all gets sent off to be condensed into a document, which is then sent to the school, sent to ourselves, and we're able to sign it off. And that's really important. At this point, we actually ended up moving into a different, we were still in the same county, but we moved into a different area, so the school catchment was different. So she needed a new school. So as she was moving into year 1, she actually started at a new school. Yeah, chalk and cheese is the only thing I can think to sort of describe it as. Where we'd had a school that were really supportive and helpful, we moved into a school that we thought would be great. It was actually a much smaller school. There was only about sort of 40 students in the school. We thought that might be really good, a calmer environment. It might actually help to ease her in, but it was the total opposite. They ended up excluding her consistently. After we'd had assurances that we don't exclude in our school. We have a no exclusion policy, and that lasted for about, I think, 3 weeks. And then she started getting excluded. She was at home for half the week every week. More than that, she was home 3 days out of 5 because they'd exclude her. She'd act out, they'd do something, and she'd be excluded. And it was a nightmare. It was probably the most stressful couple of months of my life while she was there, because she was constantly home and constantly acting out. And she realised, and this is the big issue, she realised if I do this, I'm just going to get sent home. I don't have to be at school at all. So she was doing that to get home. The EHCP was being finalised at this point. One of the points was that the whole reason for doing this was to look at special education needs schooling, and that wasn't included in the EHCP. So I'd actually appealed it, and then you have the right to do this. So once the EHCP is being drafted, you then have the right to appeal and say this wasn't included. And we had a difficult situation because initially the lady from the 0 to 25s team was saying, oh, that was never discussed. Well, that was the reason for the EHCP. Thankfully, we had a social worker involved, and we had the school that we'd had it done who all backed me up. So I was able to phone back and said, well, look, I've spoken to social worker in the school, and they both said that was the whole purpose of the EHCP. Funnily enough, we had a meeting a couple of days later, and she came in with a new school. I think it was arse covering at its best, but it worked for us in the end, because it meant that we were in a situation where she was forced to find a special needs school that was going to accommodate Sienna's requirements, and she got in there. That has been an absolute blessing for us. The difference between mainstream and special needs schooling for my daughter was huge. Now, I'm not saying that every child who has autism or has special educational needs a special needs school. It doesn't work that way. So many times, especially if you're in the right school, they've got really good provisions. And really that's what an EHCP does. Not every child who has special educational needs an EHCP within mainstream either. There are many schools which have good provisions already in place. As I say, my daughter's school initially were great. They'd put one-to-one in place for her. They'd put a sensory area for her to escape to. They'd done all these things off their own bat. They were really, really proactive and productive, and they were looking to make her situation better and help her to be educated. The difference with the new school was just astonishing, and it was really apparent we just need to get her into somewhere that understands, and the the school she's in is absolutely fantastic. So you have the right to make that appeal. If you think that something's been missed, you make sure you go back and include it, and it will pay off, because that's what it's there for. It's a legally binding document, and this is the point. On an EHCP, things like one-to-ones can be listed. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a one-to-one for every hour that your child's at school, but it may mean they have a provision in there for a certain amount of hours a day, so that there is a focus time. So if they're in maths or English or whatever the specific subject is, there's somebody to work with them and help them through. That could take the form of a TA, it could be an LSA, it could be any one of a number of things, but just having someone there who can work one-on-one, and that might be all it needs, is a few hours a week that just is that focus time that helps them to develop and to progress in whatever field it is they need. Other kids, it may be that they need a full-time one-to-one. That's what my daughter had. That was the provision on her EHCP. And it may be that it's just that, okay, we need extra work on speech and language, so that can be a provision within the EHCP. So many hours are going to be devoted to catch up or focusing on a specific area like speech and language or mathematics or whatever. That doesn't mean that your child's going to get those hours alone with that person, but it might be that there's 4 hours is prep and another 4 hours is sitting down with the child and doing the one-to-one and bringing them up to that. It can vary, but that's what needs to be specified within the EHCP. So all these provisions are made, you get the document, you're then able to sign off on it. Once you've agreed that it is actually something that fits your child's needs, it then goes into place, and it's a legally binding document, which means the schools have to stick to what's on it, and the local authorities also have to stick to what's on it. So if there's a one-to-one required, the local authorities are then required to fund that to the school. So funding should never be an issue for the school from that point forward for any of these extra things, because they're covered by the EHCP. Local authority has a responsibility to ensure that that's in place and the school is covered for it. It's really, really important, and it's why EHCPs need to be adhered to. The other side of an EHCP is it is reviewed every 12 months. Because my daughter's in a SEND school, every child there has an EHCP, so that's all scheduled in, and we have a meeting. I've got one coming up very soon. We're going to do that by video call because of everything going on at the moment. But that's basically where we review what's going on, where we want to go, and we look at the things like the goals, how she progressed with this. So something on her EHCP at the moment is speech and language. She was very low in that, and they've been working on her with what they call intervention to work on bringing those skills up, and she's been progressing steadily. And at the last one, it was like she's really made some strides. We've got a ways to go, but then that becomes the next goal, is to bring it up to that point. It looks at all the different areas, social, health, anything like that, and it puts them all together in a way that allows the school to make sure these things are being adhered to and looked after. And you review it every year to make sure it's going well and to make the next steps. And we've got a big one coming up, because technically my daughter should be going into year 7 next year. The repeated year of reception hasn't been accounted for in that, so I'm going to have to discuss that. That's neither here nor there for this, but we are having the review, because that's obviously something that we need to look at, is how she's going to progress into the senior school years and what's going to happen there. So those reviews are a really important part of it, and they again go to making sure that the development's there, that's progressing, and if there's a problem, it can be addressed. We haven't seen any progression in the speech and language, something's not working, so how can we then go about it differently? These things get addressed at every stage to make sure that's what's happening. Your school has a responsibility to follow the EHCP. Now, I've seen a couple of questions come up recently, points where people are concerned that the school isn't following or isn't allocating the resources responsibly. That's unusual. Schools are required to do that, but if there's a concern, the first step should always be to talk to your school SENCO. Call them up, make an appointment, and you can ask, how is this being allocated? And it may be that you think, why is this person only with my child for 2 hours a week, which she's supposed to have speech and language development for 8 hours? Turns out 6 hours of preparation and working on something, and then 2 hours are actually spent with the actual child. That can be oh, that's the clarity, great, no worries. But if you have genuine concerns, see your school SENCO. If you get to the end of that and you're concerned that they're not being adhered to, you can then start progressing to your local authority and saying these things aren't being adhered to, what can I do, how can I go about this? Make a formal complaint. There's governors within schools that you can approach, and at the end of the line you've got your MP. If you're concerned the school or the authorities aren't allocating the requirements that are outlined in the EHCP, it's a legally binding document, they are legally bound to do so, and if they're not, you have those options, you can do something about it. But I would err on the side of caution in that I would say 90% of the time it will be a misunderstanding. So where you think funds should be allocated or hours should be allocated for something specific, it turns out they're not being allocated. Well, there they are actually being allocated, but they're not in the way you think. It's not 8 hours straight with your child, it's actually 4 hours preparation, 4 hours with the child, 6 hours preparation, 2 hours with the child, depending on what the requirements are. But getting that clarity is you're right, and it's something you should do. School Senkos should be helping with that. Next progression is talk to the local authority about what your concerns are, that you've approached the school, that you haven't had any resolution from this, you're still concerned. They can do formal investigations and stuff like that to ensure that everything's in place. Failing anything else, there's your MP to follow that. EHCPs are just essential for special educational needs at a certain point. If your child doesn't require one, and not, as I say, not every child will require one, even in mainstream. Many schools have got the provisions in place and it's enough, and it doesn't need to have that extra to it. But if you're experiencing consistent problems within the school and within the special educational needs being met within the school, an EHCP is something you have a right to. It's something that you should persist with. And it upsets me that I hear a lot of people saying, you know, the school are balking at this, they don't want to do it. You have that right, it's a push, and you can actually apply for an EHCP yourself. You can actually go through a process where you can make the referrals and ensure that that's happening for you. The Good Schools Guide have an excellent document on this, which I will put in the comments later on. But it's a fantastic thing which goes through the different steps that it takes to get your EHCP. Really, you should be approaching your school Senko if you're looking to get one. The first thing, talk to the school Senko, express why you want to have one. If you're meeting any objections, keep pushing. You can look at making a self-referral for an EHCP yourself. As I say, the Good School Guide has some links in there, but you should be persisting with it. If you feel an EHCP is needed, go for it, do it. It has been a godsend for us, and I recommend for anybody who has children with special educational needs, that it's so important and so required. Sadly, we're in a system that doesn't account for everything at the moment, and the only way around that is to make noise. And so if you're going to be the squeaky wheel, be the squeaky wheel, because it does work. That's pretty much all I've got to say on it. Any questions? I'd like to know how you guys have gone with your EHCPs. If you've gone for an EHCP and you've experienced problems with it, please, I'd like to hear about it in the comments. Likewise, if you've had success, I'd like to hear what the differences have been for you between special educational needs schools and mainstream. If you're in a mainstream school and you found it been really successful, I'd love to hear the comments. Some positive stuff is just so needed at the moment, and that would be really great to hear. Please do like this. Please do subscribe to my channel and ring that little bell. Every time a new video goes up, you'll be notified. And I will see you next time. Don't forget about the Tasty Mail competition. Just simply put a comment on here, like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hop on over to Tasty Mail's Instagram and follow them, and we will announce the winners next show.